Hi guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel, and you are watching The Nerdy Grail. Now, we are doing another Doctor Who video today. Yes, a Doctor Who video. And we are doing a special Doctor Who video today, because one of the core aspects of Doctor Who and how it's managed to go on for so long past its 60th anniversary is through the concept of regeneration, whereby they change the main actor every so many years and replace it with a brand new actor. So it gives the show almost a new lease on life. It's almost a little bit of a soft reboot each time. And regeneration is one of the most interesting concepts in my personal opinion. And we've had so many actors now playing the Doctor, from William Hartnell, the first actor to play the Doctor, all the way to Ncuti Gatwa, who is our current Doctor. Now, in today's video, I am going to be ranking each of the regeneration stories that we've had so far, from the 10th planet all the way to the Giggle, from worst to best, in my personal opinion. Now, you need to keep that in mind. This is my personal opinion, and your list might differ to mine, and that is perfectly okay. We are all entitled to our opinions. Okay, so I'll be ranking these videos based on the story and the regeneration scene itself, really. So, I will not delay this any longer. We are going to jump in to what is my worst regeneration story. So, we are going to be looking at 16 different regenerations of the Doctor in this video, because that also includes the 10th Doctor's Meta-Crisis regeneration. So, in 16th place on this list, it's sadly going to have to go to Colin Baker, the 6th Doctor, in the story The Ultimate Foe, which is his last actual story, and then his regeneration into the 7th Doctor at the start of Time and the Rani. Now, yeah, The Ultimate Foe is the last story for Colin Baker on screen. It doesn't really do him justice, to be honest, especially the regeneration scene. Trial of the Time Lord is an interesting saga and a pretty good season overall, but the last story feels very, very rushed. And Colin Baker to this day is still the only actor to be fired from the role, which is really unfortunate because I love Colin Baker as an actor and as the Doctor. And then in his actual regeneration in Time and the Rani, it is literally just Sylvester McCoy in a wig. Colin Baker did not want to return for his regeneration, and I don't blame him. He wasn't treated very, very well during his time on the show, and so to not want to come back for the regeneration, I don't blame him. But if you want an actual good regeneration for the 6th Doctor, I would highly recommend the Big Finish story, The Last Adventure, and then the story The Brink of Death, which is the last one on the box set, because that gives the 6th Doctor a true final farewell, and is exactly what Colin Baker deserved, perfectly, if I'm perfectly honest. So, unfortunately, that is why it is in 16th place, because you don't actually get to see Colin Baker give his final hurrah and see him actually on screen. It's just Sylvester McCoy in a wig. Then, next in 15th place, we have got the 10th Doctor's Meta-Crisis regeneration in The Stolen Earth to the Journey's End from Series 4. This is a really weird one, and this is so low simply because obviously you don't actually see a change in face for the Doctor. You simply see David Tennant regenerate into David Tennant, and at the time you were confused as to whether you'd count this as an actual regeneration or not. But Time of the Doctor, Matt Smith's final story, does confirm that this was an actual regeneration, so I'm including it on this list. And the main reason, like I said, I'm including it on this list because you don't actually see the Doctor change. And it's unfortunate because it has one of the 10th Doctor's worst qualities. Because I don't mind the 10th Doctor. I do prefer David Tennant as the 14th Doctor a little bit more. But the 10th Doctor is a good Doctor. But unfortunately his vain quality does shine a lot in this story. Especially in part 2, once, you know, you've got companions like Rose and Captain Jack who have experienced the regeneration and change in face of the Doctor before, are a bit confused why he's not changed his face. And he just, you know, basically says, why would I want to change? Look at me. And it's like, come on, Doctor, that's not really what you're about. So I don't really like that. The stories themselves are pretty good, but they don't focus on regeneration. Okay? It's nice to see the return of Davros, and this is sort of like the swan song to the original RTD era, bringing back all previous companions like Rose, Mickey, Jackie, Captain Jack, Martha. You've got like the whole team in this story, so that's quite nice. Seeing Davros again is brilliant. The Daleks taking their plot to take Earth far across space, you know, and have the planets in the sky. Something that gets talked about a lot in New Who. It's an interesting story, a very intense two-parter, but as a regeneration story, it's not the best, and obviously the Doctor doesn't actually really change his appearance, so it's almost like, did it really, really happen? So that's kind of why it's low on this list in 15th place. Okay, and at number 14, you will start to notice a little bit of a pattern going on here, because in the first two regenerations that I showed on my list, you didn't actually get to see the Doctor change, albeit whether it was the actor wasn't there or the Doctor just changed into the same face, like the Meta Crisis Doctor. And that's no different with number 14. As in number 14, I've got the War Games, which is the second Doctor regenerating into the third Doctor. Patrick Troughton into John Pertwee. Now, the War Games as a story itself is really, really good. I love the War Games. It's thoroughly entertaining. However, it is, in my personal opinion, a bit too long. I think 10 parts is far too long. It drags heavily in the middle. But when the Time Lords come into it towards the end, I think it is fantastic. And I love how powerful the Time Lords are made out to be in this story. It's also the departure of Jamie and Zoe as companions, so it's a proper, almost a full-on refresh, reboot of the show, really, because you're losing all three of your core main cast. But it is a very, very good story. However, you don't actually see the second Doctor regenerate, because in his actual regeneration scene, he simply fades away, spiralling into this black void, screaming, "No, you can't do this to me," because he's been exiled to Earth by the Time Lords and forced to regenerate. So it's kind of unfortunate we don't get to see John Pertwee in this story, but I understand for the time they didn't have him ready to do that, so they couldn't use John Pertwee. But yeah, overall it's not a bad story, but as a regeneration story itself, especially with the regeneration scene, it's not as memorable to me, and it's not one that I go back to rewatch very often, because it's difficult to rewatch a 10-part story, because it's over 4 hours of content that you have to sit down and watch. And that's why it's this low at number 14. Okay, then at number 13, we've got a bit of a controversial pick, I think. But remember, this is my personal opinion. You are entitled to have your opinions as well. But for me, at number 13, it is the 10th Doctor's regeneration from the End of Time Part 1 and the End of Time Part 2. Yeah, I'm not a massive fan of this regeneration story. I'm not a big fan of the regeneration scene itself, because it just feels very undoctory to me. The 10th Doctor is this heroic figure, and that's how he's been portrayed through most of his season. Well, all of his seasons, really. But in his final specials, he's portrayed more as quite cowardly and almost too vain. He doesn't want to give up his face. And that really shows in his final line of "I don't want to go." It doesn't set up the next Doctor very well, or the next showrunner, really. So I'm not a big fan of that. And the 10th Doctor has a lot of tantrums in The End of Time, Part 1 and Part 2. There's two scenes in particular. The cafe scene with him and Wilf, where he treats regeneration as dying and some new man goes sauntering away and I'm dead. It's not the best picture to paint, really. And then, obviously, you know, when he's then screaming at Wilf because he knows he's got to sacrifice himself to save him, saying that it's not fair, and yeah, it's not the best look for 10, to be honest. He should have gone down in a much better way, which the giggle, which we'll get to, almost does this better, really. It almost does this much better, and I'll explain that when we get to the giggle. But yeah, it is, unfortunately, in 13th place, the 10th Doctor into the 11th Doctor, so David Tennant into Matt Smith. I'm just not a big fan of how the 10th Doctor goes out. It's completely undoctory, in my personal opinion, and that's why it is low on this list. I'm awfully sorry. Okay, now in 12th place, we have the War Doctor's regeneration into the 9th Doctor. So John Hurt into Christopher Eccleston from the story The Day of the Doctor, which, as a story, The Day of the Doctor was a really, really good story. It was thoroughly entertaining, and it was great to see Tom Baker return in a new role of the Curator, to see David Tennant obviously come back again as the 10th Doctor, to see Billie Piper return as, well, not unfortunately as Rose, but she does come back as something called the Moment, who follows around the War Doctor for most of the story. You know, and then you've got characters that are introduced like Osgood. You've got the return of Kate Lethbridge Stewart. It's a really, really fun story. The return of the Zygons as well. A better deep dive into the Time War at last. It was really good. However, for me, as an anniversary of 50 years, it felt a bit more like just an anniversary of New Who, which I'm not going to complain about, but considering this is the 50th, you think there would be a little bit more of before it came back in 2005, to be perfectly honest. But overall, as a story, it is a very, very thoroughly entertaining story, and I really, really did enjoy it. As a regeneration story for the War Doctor, it does an okay job. I just feel like the regeneration was sort of just thrown in there because they sort of had to. They had to fill that gap and tell you why, well, how Christopher Eccleston's Doctor came to be. Because he just sort of goes back into the TARDIS. He's perfectly fine and healthy, and he just randomly starts regenerating and just claims that obviously his body must be wearing a bit thin, so maybe it's to do with old age. Like, you know, now that the war's done, now that he's finally given himself the title of the Doctor, he can let that persona go. That's sort of how I like to think about it, really. But it does just feel a bit random. And then he starts to regenerate. And again, similar to previous regenerations on this list, you don't fully get to see the next Doctor take over. There's quite a few regenerations where you don't. You don't fully see Christopher Eccleston's face, because obviously at the time he wasn't there to actually film a post-regeneration scene. So you just start to see the face change into Eccleston. You can see in the top, one of the top right-hand corner, like the hair and, you know, the facial structure start to change a little bit. So yeah, it just feels a bit of a random regeneration in this story, if I'm being perfectly honest. But overall, it's not too bad. That's why it's not dead last on this list. I do like The Day of the Doctor, don't get me wrong. It is a fantastic story. But as a regeneration story, it's a little bit hit or miss for me, and that's why it's this low on the list. Well, number 11 is quite similar to our number 16 on the list, to be honest, because it's sort of a regeneration story and a post-regeneration story at the same time. And that is the TV movie. So this is the 7th Doctor, played by Sylvester McCoy, who regenerates into the 8th Doctor, played by Paul McGann. I have a real soft spot for the TV movie. It's one of the most different Doctor Who stories of all time, because obviously at the time, Doctor Who had already been pulled. The plug had been pulled, it was cancelled, it had vanished off the screen in 1989, and they weren't sure if it was ever going to come back. But then in 1996, a TV movie was done, where the BBC had teamed up with the Fox network over in America to create the TV movie as a sort of a pilot to what might hopefully, if it was successful enough, become a new series. But they didn't want to fully reboot the show, so they obviously asked Sylvester McCoy to come in so that he could film a regeneration into the 8th Doctor, played by Paul McGann, to still keep the old fans sort of interested. I quite like the TV movie. So the first 15 to 20 minutes, you are sort of still with the 7th Doctor. So Sylvester McCoy is vastly different. He's vastly different in this story. It's quite strange, because the 7th Doctor in his era was quite a forward thinker. He was very manipulative. He could always foresee events that were coming. But in this one, he gets shot down by a street gang outside the TARDIS. And I'm a bit like, that doesn't feel right for the 7th Doctor. He always likes to plan ahead. And the fact that maybe he just, it almost feels like he didn't check for any danger outside. He just stumbled out and just got shot. It just felt a bit odd to me. But that's not what kills the 7th Doctor. He gets shot and has to get taken to hospital. But little does he know, it's actually his future companion, Grace Holloway, who ends up killing him. Because obviously he's an alien. And his internal structure is different to humans, and so Grace, during an operation to take the bullets out and save his life, messes up and ends up accidentally killing him. Oops, not a good start, is it? But the way they do the regeneration is really, really cool in this story. I'm not going to talk too much about the Paul McGann side of this movie because it's the regeneration list. I'll do that in a post-regeneration story list. But the regeneration is pretty cool as well. He's in a morgue. There's lightning striking. They play it in parallel with a guy who is watching Frankenstein. And so the Doctor resurrects at the exact moment that Frankenstein starts to wake up, and they do the he's alive, and the Doctor just sits up. But the regeneration's quite funny because you see the Seventh Doctor's face sort of do all that, sort of like morphs, and then you see Paul McGann's face sort of do it. And I believe I heard in interviews that apparently Paul McGann wasn't as comfortable to do all the facial movements, so he just does a little... And it is quite funny, actually. But it is a pretty interesting and new take on regeneration as well. And the story itself is pretty good. I have a real soft spot for the TV movie. And that's why it just falls shy of the top 10, coming in at number 11. Okay, and breaking into the top 10. Now, this one has come up in my estimations a little bit. The more I've sat back and thought about it, the less I hate it. I'm still not a huge supporter of what went on in this story. And the fact that it might not happen again also gives me that mindset of, well, why bother do it in the first place? Can't we just have a normal regeneration? And you probably know already what I'm talking about. But in 10th place is the 14th Doctor's regeneration, bi-regeneration. Don't really know what to call it. I suppose call it a bi-regeneration, but for the sake of this list, I'll say regeneration. Into the current Doctor, the 15th Doctor, played by Ncuti Gatwa. Yeah, so this one is a bi-regeneration. So the Giggle as a story is an interesting one. It sees the return of the Toymaker because it takes place during the 60th anniversary year. And Neil Patrick Harris does a fantastic job as the Toymaker. I absolutely adore him. And David Tennant as the 14th Doctor. I much prefer 14 to 10, if I'm honest. I even cosplay as 14 when I go to Comic Cons. I love his outfit as well. I think 14 is much better now that he's, you know, got more experiences thanks to the 11th, 12th and 13th Doctors and all that trauma that he's picked up over the years as well. I think it's really made him grow as a character. So I love 14. But then when you get to the bi-regeneration, stroke regeneration, he goes out like I wanted 10 to go out. He finally accepts that it's time to go. And I love that. And I was so happy watching that on screen, you know, saying it's time. You know, it's not dying. I love that he said it's not dying. It was brilliant because in contrast to 10, who says, when I change, it feels like dying. Whereas now 14, you've got, it's not dying. It's brilliant. It's perfect. Russell, you did a fantastic job there. And then his final words of allons-y, let's go, is the polar opposite to I don't want to go. It's perfect. He did such a good job. And then he doesn't actually go. We see him split into two. We see 15 come out of 14 and 14 gets to carry on, as usual, with his own TARDIS on top of that. Why did you do that? You did such a good job. It would have been the perfect regeneration. Why did you spoil it? There was no need for that at all. And the fact that we might not get something like that happen again further ruins this. It makes it go from a 10 to a 4. It's like, why did you do that? I adored the story and the regeneration until they split. You know? I wouldn't have even minded if they split and then at the end of the game of catch, once the Toymaker had been put away, they then morph back together again and it's only Ncuti that stays there. I don't understand. I don't understand. It's such a shame. And 14 starts to fall apart then as well. He gets too emotional again then and starts to revert almost back to the 10 personality. It's such a shame. It spoils what, for me, is one of my favourite New Who Doctors behind Eccleston and Capaldi. I would say 14 is probably then my next favourite New Who Doctor. But it's just such a shame that, again, he seems to go out on a little bit of a whimper. But it was still perfect up until that point, and that's why it does crack into the top 10. Coming in at number 9, we have the 12th Doctor, played by Peter Capaldi, who regenerates into the 13th Doctor, played by Jodie Whittaker. Now, Peter Capaldi is my favourite New Who Doctor. For me, he encapsulates everything that I love about the Doctor. Especially since I'm more of a classic Whovian than a new Whovian. Peter Capaldi, to me, feels just like all the classic Doctors, with a bit of a modern twist as well. So I love Peter Capaldi. This is also a multi-Doctor story as well. as we do get David Bradley playing a version of the First Doctor, because obviously, unfortunately, William Hartnell passed away many years ago, and so David Bradley does a fantastic job. He also first played the First Doctor, stroke Bill Hartnell as well, in a drama documentary showing the life of William stroke Bill Hartnell, An Adventure in Space and Time, which I would highly recommend watching as well. It's fantastic. Sacha Dhawan is also in that as well. But the story itself, 12 sort of goes through a mini 10 arc where he's a bit fed up of changing all the time. He doesn't really want to keep regenerating. And so he would like to, go as he is. And so almost refuses to regenerate. And so they sort of tell a tale of how the First Doctor, apparently, after the events of 10th Planet, also didn't really want to change. And so they both go on a journey to finally accept that they need to go on living. They need to pass on the torch to the next one, really. It is quite a sweet story. There's no real threat in it, though. That's the problem. There's not really a major villain per se. There is, but you never really feel like they're in much danger throughout the story. And then the regeneration itself is pretty nice, because the 12th Doctor finally accepts that he needs to go. He does this massive speech in the TARDIS. A little bit cringy at times, I must admit, especially when he says about children can hear your name. I think that goes a bit too far, if I'm honest. But overall, the regeneration is nice, very sweet, and the last line of "Doctor, I let you go" is perfect, really. It's very sweet, especially since he didn't want to let the Doctor go at the start, but now he's like, "Doctor, I let you go," regenerates into Jodie. And it is brilliant. It is a lovely story as well, and a decent farewell to my favourite New Who Doctor. Not my favourite Doctor, but he is my favourite New Who Doctor, and I had the pleasure of meeting him at a Comic-Con many years ago. But yes, so in 9th place, it has to go to Twice Upon a Time. Then in 8th place, and I think this is quite sweet actually, coming pretty much immediately after Twice Upon a Time. I didn't really plan that initially. It just sort of fell that way, really, when I was thinking about it. But I would say, yeah, in 8th place then, has to go then to The 10th Planet, which is the very first ever regeneration story. So it is the First Doctor's regeneration into the Second Doctor, William Hartnell into Patrick Troughton. And this is such an iconic story, being the very first regeneration, but also the first story to feature my second favourite villain of all of Doctor Who, the Cybermen. The first for me is the Ice Warriors, but the Cybermen hold a dear place in my heart. And it is a fantastic little story. Sadly, at this point, William Hartnell was extremely ill, so for almost 50% of this story, he's sort of out of action, really, resting, and so Ben and Polly sort of have to take the lead in helping to stop this Cyberman invasion. And I love the design of the Mondasian Cybermen. They are my favourite design of the Mondasian, of the Cybermen in general, because they are supposed to be us, just upgraded, and they look the most like us, still having the human hands. They've got like cloth faces, so you can still see a lot of the expressions. The way they talk is eerie. It's funny to listen to, but eerie. I really, really enjoy it. But the regeneration itself, especially after watching Twice Upon a Time, knowing that the First Doctor went on that trip with the 12th Doctor and then stumbled back to the TARDIS, pretty much he was about to regenerate. He got into the TARDIS and you could see him like struggling to control himself and control the TARDIS. The TARDIS starts to go a bit out of control. But Ben and Polly are outside banging on the door asking the Doctor to let them in. And he uses his last bit of energy to finally take control and open the doors to let them in. And I think that is heroic and brilliant, especially since at the start of Hartnell's era, he was, a bit of a grumpy old man who didn't really care much about his companions, but using his last bit of energy to help his companions and let them in so that they could then help him is brilliant. And regeneration is just so short and sweet. Obviously, at the time, visually, they didn't have a lot to work with. This was the 1960s, so it was just the Doctor on the floor. You see Hartnell's face, this big glowing white light appears, and then he morphs into Patrick Troughton as the light starts to fade. Short, sweet, and it's a lovely, lovely story. So it had to go into the top 10, and that's why it's at number 8. Okay, and in 7th place, we finally have the 8th Doctor regenerating into the War Doctor. Paul McGann into John Hurt. Now, for a very long time, we didn't know if Paul McGann regenerates into Christopher Eccleston or whether there was something in between. But due to the events of the Series 7 finale and the 50th anniversary, we know that's not the case. We know that Paul McGann regenerates into another incarnation, and then that incarnation regenerates into Christopher Eccleston. And this is a very short, sweet special that played before the 50th anniversary, titled Night of the Doctor, which is very, very, very cool. All takes place during the Time War. The Doctor receives a distress signal by this woman called Cass. Her ship is crashing, is damaged, and the Doctor tries to help her get off the ship before, well, unfortunately they'll meet an untimely end. But obviously Cass discovers that the Doctor's a Time Lord, thinks that the Time Lords are just as bad as the Daleks due to the war, destroying planets, ruining civilizations, so refuses to leave, locks down the ship, basically says to the Doctor, you need to get off now, I'm not coming with you, I'd rather sacrifice myself than go with you. The Doctor, being heroic, refuses to leave his side, and so, unfortunately, the ship crashes with them both still on it. But they land on Khan. The Sisterhood of Khan resurrect the Doctor temporarily and tell him that he's going to regenerate or he won't make it. But the Doctor, still refusing to join the Time War, basically saying that he would rather go than change and join the war. But the Sisterhood managed to convince him, and so he does drink this magic elixir that causes him to regenerate into the War Doctor, played by John Hurt. And it's a fantastic short. Paul McGann is brilliant in it, and it's so nice to have another bit of Paul McGann content on screen, because up till then it was just the TV movie, so it was really, really good to see him play that role again. And it was good because the Eighth Doctor is so heroic. I absolutely love it, and I love his outfit as well. I think it's brilliant. And he also does say a few of his Big Finish companions as well, almost making them canon. So it's nice to know that those adventures are out there as well. So I think it was a brilliant regeneration. It was the first one also to use, not the first one technically in terms of that we saw on screen, but technically in terms of the numbering of the Doctor, he's the first one to use that glowing effect when he regenerates. Short and sweet as well, the regeneration. Just starts to glow, regenerates, boom, John Hurt. Fantastic little short regeneration, and it's nice to finally see the regeneration of the Eighth Doctor. That's why it's down here at number 7. And coming in at number 6, just shy of the top 5, we have the 13th Doctor's regeneration, played by Jodie Whittaker, into the 14th Doctor, again played by Sir David Tennant. Now, this was a fantastic story, titled The Power of the Doctor. I loved it. It was an hour and a half special, set as the centenary special as well, 100 years of the BBC, and it was done brilliantly. For me personally, this felt a little bit more like what the 50th anniversary should have been, because there's so many references to, well, classic Who as well. Because in this story you feature the return of Tegan Jovanka, you feature the return of Ace, you've got other companions towards the end, like Joe Grant, Melanie Bush, Ian Chesterton as well. Thank God we got to see him again. Bless William Russell, and we will forever miss you. But it was lovely to see all those companions again. You've got then, you've got the Cybermen, the Daleks, the Master. You even get cameos from previous Doctors, such as David Bradley comes back as the first Doctor. You've got Peter Davison, Colin Baker, Sylvester McCoy, Paul McGann, and obviously the fact that Jodie Whittaker regenerates again into David Tennant. You see the return of a forced regeneration. You see the Master basically almost doing his plot from the TV movie again in this as well, where he wants to steal the Doctor's body, steal future regenerations. It's unbelievable how much they cram into this. This story also is the last for companions Yaz and Dan, and also features the return of David Bradley's Graham as well. There's so much packed into this story. It is a fantastic story. I adore it. The regeneration is beautiful as well. The 13th Doctor does go out as a Doctor should. They go out with their head held high, and I love her comment to the TARDIS as well, is take care of the next one. I'm like, oh, that is so sweet. I love it. And she leaves the TARDIS, standing on top of a cliff, and beautiful, the theme of the 13th Doctor plays, and it just pans out backwards. You see her regenerating as the sun starts to set. It's gorgeous. And then regenerates into David Tennant's Doctor as well. And it's a cool little post-regeneration scene. You know, he does his classic, what? I know, and and then I know these teeth, in reference to his first line of new teeth. That's weird. It's quite nice, really. But yeah, I thought it was a fantastic story, and this was a story for me that made the 13th Doctor the Doctor, because at the time I struggled to connect with the 13th Doctor. Nothing to do with Jodie Whittaker, really. It was more to do with the writing of how they wrote her. But in this story, she was fantastic. I adore the 13th Doctor in this story. She is the Doctor, and I do miss Jodie Whittaker at times as well. I think she does a fantastic job. But yeah, that's why this just misses out on the top 5 at number 6. Okay, we are here. It is now the top 5, and in 5th place, it has to go to... Yes, using this steelbook to represent it again. It is the 11th Doctor's regeneration into the 12th Doctor. Matt Smith into Peter Capaldi in the story, The Time of the Doctor. And wow, what a roller coaster The Time of the Doctor was. It was an hour story set on Trenzalore. The Time of the Doctor sort of wraps up every single 11th Doctor arc all in one story. The cracks in the wall, the name of the Doctor... it's all wrapped up in this. The mystery of the Impossible Girl. It's all wrapped up in this story as well. So it makes the 11th Doctor's era quite neat and tidy, really. Answers all of your questions. And it's just a good little send-off to the 11th Doctor. It's a bit of fun as well, a bit quirky. At one point in the story, the 11th Doctor's bald because he was filming for Terminator Genesis, I believe, at the time. So he shaved his head. He's naked at some point in the story. He becomes old in the story as well. So you get to see lots of different aspects of the 11th Doctor. It's really, really bizarre. But it is such a fun story. But what I want to talk about in particular is his regeneration. He has one of the best regeneration speeches. And how he's trying to convince Clara and the audience that it's okay that to change, that we all change through life. But as long as we remember who we were before, then that's fine, And he says that he'll never forget when the Doctor was him. And I think that's just beautiful. And he technically has 2 regenerations in the story. He does a big blast of regeneration energy to destroy the Dalek invading fleet when he first gets his new regeneration cycle. And then he does a short, sweet, almost sneeze regeneration into the 12th Doctor. And the post-regeneration scene with the 12th Doctor is quite a funny and entertaining one. I love that he also gets to see Amy Pond again for the one last time in his hallucination as he's regenerating. And also the removal of the bow tie is a chef's kiss. It's sad to see, but it is true to the 11th Doctor's character. So it had to make it into the top 5. And that's why in 5th place, it has to go to The Time of the Doctor. Moving on into 4th place now. Just missing out on the bronze medal spot, we have the 3rd Doctor's regeneration into the 4th Doctor. So John Pertwee's regeneration into Tom Baker. In the story, Planet of the Spiders. I think this is a fantastic send-off to the 3rd Doctor. Not the one that was originally penned, because apparently it was supposed to be a face-off again against the Doctor and the Master. But sadly, due to Roger Delgado's passing, that couldn't be the case. But they still threw everything at this story. You get to see everything of the 3rd Doctor. You get to see his sassy nature, get to see his quips, get to see him as the action hero doing all his usual fight moves, and you get to see him use all of his vehicles as well. You see him flying a helicopter, you see him in the Who-mobile, you see him in Bessie. There's a massive long chase scene in, I think, episode 2 or 3. It's brilliant. It's fantastic. I adore it. Obviously, Sarah Jane Smith is the companion for this story. And it's very bittersweet. This is the first story to call it regeneration as well. And the Doctor meets his old mentor as well, who ends up helping him through his change as well. It's sort of about letting go of his ego in this story as well. Because the 3rd Doctor did have a little bit of an ego. But he's such a gentle soul. And this is one of the few regenerations where the Doctor actually dies at the end. He doesn't actually make it. His body is destroyed by the radiation from the Metebelis crystals, and so he collapses onto the floor, gives a beautiful speech in front of the Brigadier and Sarah. Sarah's obviously crying, really upset about what's happened, and he tries to say the line, a tear, Sarah Jane, don't cry. While there's life, and it's sort of reflecting on earlier where about while there's life, there's hope. But it's just beautiful, bittersweet. I absolutely love it. It's a fantastic way for the Third Doctor to go. And he does overcome his ego. That's why he goes back and pretty much sacrifices himself as well. It is a great story. 6 parts was a little bit long, but I think it's fine for this story. And John Pertwee is a fantastic actor to play the Doctor. And I just adore him so much. He's one of my favourite classic Doctors. Not my favourite classic Doctor, but he is one of my favourites. And that's why this story had to make it into the top 5, and it's made it at number 4. Getting the bronze medal, it's going to the 4th Doctor into the 5th Doctor. Tom Baker into Peter Davison in the story Logopolis. Now, the 4th Doctor, played by Tom Baker, is my favourite Doctor. As obviously you can tell by my shirt and obviously by my picture. Yeah, the 4th Doctor is my favourite Doctor. I love the 4th Doctor. And so I think Logopolis is a fantastic story. It's not through bias either, because genuinely it is such an eerie story and has such a unique concept in the concept of the Watcher. This mysterious figure who follows the Doctor all through the story. No matter where he is, whether he's on Earth or whether he's in space, just watching him from the background. And then right at the end, once the Doctor does unfortunately meet his untimely demise, he's there to help and support and helps the regeneration go forward. And we later discover that the Watcher is actually the Doctor who has actually come back to help with the regeneration. As the 4th Doctor mentions in his last line of, it's the end, but the moment has been prepared for, as if he knew this was coming all along. The 4th Doctor obviously has one of the longest tenures of any Doctor, 7 years in the role. Tom Baker was an icon, and still is to this day. If ever you ask people who the Doctor was, they'll either say David Tennant or they'll say Tom Baker, because you can't forget the guy with the long scarf. And I love Logopolis. It's really well paced, really eerie. There's a lot of companions in the story as well, because this story does obviously feature the first full appearance of Anthony Ainley as the Master. He does appear briefly in the previous story, Keeper of Traken. This also features the introduction of Tegan Jovanka, the Doctor's current companion of Adric, and the return of Nyssa. So then you've got the full 5th Doctor TARDIS team ready for when Tom Baker leaves. And it's such a beautiful regeneration. The Doctor and the Master have a tussle at the top of a radio telescope. The Doctor sacrifices himself to save the whole universe from destruction. And he gets flashbacks from all of his villains to start with, telling him that he needs to go. You can't, die, Doctor, pretty much. The Doctor does fall, but then he's supported by all of his companions, and he has hallucinations from Harry, Sarah, K9, Leela, both Romanas, the Brigadier, all, hoping that he's gonna make it through, worried about him. It's really nice to see those flashes. And the 4th Doctor goes out with a smile as well, which is quite nice as well. The longest running Doctor not showing off, he is like taking it on the chin, really. Goes out smiling at his companions, almost giving them that look of, don't worry, it's going to be okay. I've prepared for this. You will be in safe hands. And I think it's fantastic. I love the eerie music. It gives you that sense of foreboding that something is coming and that the end is near. And it's also the first time you properly hear the TARDIS cloister bells as well, which happens when there's serious danger, adding to the sense of threat in this story. So I think it is a fantastic story, and so it had to get the bronze medal on this list. Claiming the silver medal on this list is the 9th Doctor's regeneration into the 10th Doctor. Christopher Eccleston into David Tennant in the story The Parting of the Ways. And wow, what a series finale this was. This was the first series since the revival in 2005, and it went out with a bang. If the series finale flopped, who knows where the show would have been. We wouldn't have had all the other Doctors that we've had since. Series 1 is a fantastic series overall. In my opinion, there is no real bad stories in this series. Well, there might be one, but I'll save that maybe for a video reviewing Series 1. But it is a fantastic season overall. Christopher Eccleston is my second favourite modern Who Doctor, behind Peter Capaldi. For me, he is the Doctor. He's fantastic, and I'm gutted that we didn't get anything more from him on screen. That is, he has come back and done a lot of Big Finish, which I'm really thankful for. And I like his relationship with Rose. I think this is the season where Rose shines the best. I don't think she works very well after this, but she's really good in this. And part of the ways, it's a Dalek in finale as well, which they're usually really good. And invading a space station as well, So you got that claustrophobic feel with the Daleks invading, and the Ninth Doctor sort of just takes it all on the chin. He sacrifices himself in order to save Rose multiple times in this story, to be honest. Like, he sends Rose away because he's worried about her safety, and when she comes back, he then sacrifices himself to save her again. And his final speech as well, he just goes out smiling and just comforts Rose in what should be his time of need, but in Rose's time of need as well. He forgets about him and just focuses on her, even though he's the one who's going to change and going to leave, And his last lines of, I just want to tell you, you were fantastic, absolutely fantastic, and you know what, so was I. And then his big cheesy smile comes on, and then boom, he regenerates. I think it's such a poetic and brilliant send-off to such a fantastic Doctor. I adore this story, and the Daleks are really threatening. The Emperor Dalek as well, that booming voice is brilliant. Captain Jack is fantastic in this story as well, played by John Barrowman. It's just overall, it's a fantastic story, and it was well deserving of the silver medal on this list. So it goes to The Parting of the Ways. Finally here, and by process of elimination, there is only one story left, and for me, it has always been this story. I have such a soft spot for this story, and I know it's huge in the Doctor Who community as well. What story am I talking about? Well, obviously, it is The Caves of Androzani. This has to take top spot as the best regeneration story in all of Doctor Who still to this day. It is a fantastic story, and if you have not seen this story, you need to see it. It is brilliant. I mean, where do I begin? I'm going to do a full-on review, I think, of this story at some point, because it needs to be done. But the Doctor and new companion Peri have landed on Androzani Minor in the middle of a war, pretty much. And from the start, they're in danger. Within the first 5 minutes, Peri and the Doctor both get infected with what's known as spectrox toxemia, and they're slowly dying all through the story. The Doctor's hands, you start seeing rashes and skin flaking away. You see scars appearing on his head. They're both losing energy. They're both struggling to remain conscious. It's terrifying to watch. And they have no allies in this story either. Everybody hates them just for being there. So they've got no support, and when they need it the most, because they're dying, but no one wants to help them. Shara's Jack as well is fantastic. He is a villain, but he's the only one who kind of supports them through the story, but that's only because he's got a weird fascination with Peri. So he does start to help them towards the end of the story, once he realises that he could lose Peri. But the Doctor, oh my word, Peter Davison is on fire in this story. Brilliant. He is fantastic. I love him to pieces. And the best part is he sacrifices himself for someone you barely know if you ignore Big Finish. Because if you include Big Finish, then it sort of takes the impact away a little bit, because they would have gone on plenty of adventures on top of this. But for just on-screen appearances, he is sacrificing his life for someone he barely knows. He doesn't really know Peri, because in her first story, they didn't spend much time together. So this is their first proper adventure, and the Doctor has to basically regenerate for her, pretty much. And the regeneration itself is perfect. They have the antidote for the thing that's basically killing them, and the Doctor accidentally drops it on the floor while he's carrying Peri back to the TARDIS. So they only have enough for one person, and he obviously just immediately gives it to her. Doesn't even think. Just straight away, he's like, Peri, open your mouth, you must drink this, and gives it all to her. And then obviously, because there's none left for him, it triggers his regeneration. But he doesn't actually know if it's going to cause a regeneration. He thinks he could just go, and that's it. And they do a bit of a regeneration from the Gopless, where he sees previous companions telling him that he needs to go on. You can't stop now. There's worlds that need you. The Master comes in to taunt him, and that sort of triggers him to change. And then boom, you've got Colin Baker's Sixth Doctor. We don't talk about what happens then in the next story. But overall, this is a fantastic story, and it had to be #1. And to be honest, this is probably my favourite Doctor Who story of all time. I adore the Kazarian Army so much, and that's why it has to win top spot on my Regeneration list. That is my list ranking all the Regeneration stories from worst to best in my personal opinion. I hope you did enjoy this video. Keep in mind that this is my personal list. But please, if your lists differ, please pop it in the comments below. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a like as well. And subscribe if you're new, because I want my channel to grow. But I hope you did enjoy this video. And this is going to be the Nerdy Grail signing out for now. And I will see you all in the next video. Bye for now, everybody.